If you had told me 3 days before that my husband was going to be arrested, I would have said, really?
Right.
But then I also wouldn't have guessed in the first 30 things of what he would be arrested for, that it would be that. I was so shocked.
The Cleveland Clinic reports that for every 2 to 5 men with hypersexuality, one woman is also affected. Yet these women, including the partners of addicted men, tend to be overlooked. Maddie Corman, with her play and film Accidentally Brave, seeks to highlight the experiences of those overlooked partners. My name is Dominic Lawson. Let's go beyond theory.
Maddie Corman, thank you so much for coming on Beyond Theory. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, we were kind of talking off camera a little bit about how we kind of met but didn't really meet.
Yeah.
Right? And one of the things I know about you is that you're big on energy.
I am?
Yeah.
I guess I am.
Yeah, like
I
just
do.
picking up on people's kind of like mannerisms and energy and stuff like that. Talk about that a little bit if you don't mind. Like what do you pick up from like people's vibes?
Well, that's a really great question. And I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that before. I think that I come from a background of being an actress, but also a people pleaser. So and those two things are not mutually exclusive, but I'm good at, I think, figuring out who you are and what you might need, which serves me well and also doesn't serve me well. I then about coming up on 9 years ago, which I know I'm going to jump right in, but something happened in my life and my whole world blew up and I suddenly felt very scared of people, which I had never felt in my life. And I always loved kind of telling stories and meeting new people and hearing their stories. And suddenly I felt afraid for my family, afraid for my kids, and I wanted to make sure that they were safe from people's judgment, from people's questions, from people's insensitive remarks. And I think I went on hyper overdrive that way.
Right.
And so the fact that I ran into you and your wife, and we didn't know that we were there for the same reason or with the same company or anything, and I was with my husband and we just saw this other couple and we were just four people talking to each other. Right. And honestly, that was a big deal for me because I haven't experienced that so much in the last few years where I could just be anonymous with my partner and see another couple that looked happy. There was a lot of, whether I made it up or not, I felt like people were looking at me and judging me. And then I had to do a quick survey of what do they think? What are they going to say? Am I going to be okay? Especially when my kids were around.
Right.
So I think I'm recalibrating to just be open to people. And one of the things I love, we're actually in New York City.
Right.
And I am a suburban girl. I tend to gravitate towards small towns, but there's something I love about the anonymity of a city where I can just be around people, but people don't know my story.
Right.
And I can be who I want to be while I'm on the subway.
So we were in Los Angeles and now we're here in New York, like you said, for, the screening of Accidentally Brave, your film.
Yeah.
Phenomenal film.
Oh, thank you.
Phenomenal film. I've watched it 4 times now.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Sorry.
No.
That's more than I've watched it, but thanks, Dominic.
I think I appreciated, the storytelling and stuff like that. But I want to check in with you really quickly because we're in New York.
Yeah.
It's a little different vibe.
Yeah, it's my hometown.
You're right. It's hometown.
It's also
New York,
where everything happened.
Correct.
I was going to say jokingly the scene of the crime, but it's literally the scene
Correct.
of my husband's crime.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So if you would just kind of, well, first, leading up to, because the event, we're going to have tomorrow evening.
Yeah.
Leading up to the last couple of days, what's the feeling? What's your process? Put me in Maddie's head for a little bit.
Oh, you really don't want to be there. Trust me.
I asked for
but
it.
I'll put you there. I'm nervous. I'm nervous about details, which I'm not really nervous about. Who will my so many people have been very good to me and my family, and they're here in this area, so they can come to this thing, and I want them to be well taken care of.
Right.
So I'm worried about that. I'm worried about strangers seeing this. I'm worried about what I'm going to wear. I'm a worrying gal. And a really beautiful friend of mine who's been on this path with me said, and I was like, also, what about shoes? And she said, hey, Maddie, where's your faith? Where's your faith at? And if anything has gotten me through these last few years, it's not just the amazing people in my life. It really has been addiction, and the consequences really brought me to my knees, really did. And I needed to just have faith. And I have had incredible things happen. And I think I am safe, but I don't always feel safe. And I know that I don't speak for all partners, but I do think partners of addicts, and certainly in my experience, partners of sex addicts who've experienced betrayal, there's just everything that seems real is suddenly not real. The ground under my feet went from feeling solid to quicksand. So when I'm nervous or excited about an event, whatever it might be, it's an uncomfortable but familiar feeling of my chest gets tight, my throat gets tight, and I have to remind myself that sometimes fear and excitement feel really similar. And I think I'm excited this time around.
Okay.
It's much less scary. But it's always a little scary, even though I've done a play where I did this story. I told the story live night after night, and now it's a film. There's just always something about giving over control and sharing this with other people and not knowing how people will react.
Right.
So I'm excited and scared, and sometimes I get tired when I feel like that. Sometimes I get hyper. I want to run away, and I want to run towards what I'm feeling. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No,
but
you did, but it did bring up another question that I want to ask you really
Sure.
quickly. Because we have many of our audience who have those similar traits,
Yeah.
right? And it's kind of hard for them to let people take care of them because they're so busy taking care of everybody else, right?
Yeah.
How do you go through that process of like trusting people to take care of Maddie?
Practice.
Okay.
I learned how to ask for help, but really only when I desperately needed it. And I am trying to maintain the ability to ask for help even when I'm not in the throes of desperation. Just that I need a hand with this, or I'm feeling scared. Can you just talk to me for a little bit? And I also was thinking about this when I lost my mom when I was 16. And I remember thinking, well, this grief is too much for other people. I mean, it's really too much for me, but really, I'm going to give it a year. because I see other people's faces when I share this, and
Right.
it feels like I said about being aware of other people's reactions, I was like, oh, I'm freaking out the other 16-year-olds and even the 30-year-olds and 50-year-olds. My grief is too big. So I'm just going to give it a little time, but then everyone will be bored of it and it'll be too much. And here I am, 54 years old, and I'm still grieving that loss. And when everything happened, when my husband got arrested and my life exploded, I made a little deal with myself as I was trying to put the pieces back together that I wouldn't be so mean to myself this time around, even though it was such a different circumstance, that I wouldn't say I'm okay when I wasn't okay yet.
Right.
And I'm in a different place than I was when I wrote this piece, when I experienced this. But it's still in me. I'm still a person who went through a real trauma, and I am feeling better. I present as really okay, but I want to just share the truth is that I still have days that I feel those feelings, even though they're not necessarily happening right now.
Right.
But some really scary things have happened in my life. And so sometimes when I hear a loud noise, I can't quite let go of the instinct. So I'm working on that, and I have a lot of people helping me. But I also struggle with asking for help because so many people have helped me, and I feel like much more comfortable being the one helping.
Right.
But what I learned in 12-step recovery and also actually at Family Week at the Meadows was more of a peer relationship, which I'm less comfortable with. Like, I either want to be in awe of you and you're my mentor, or I want to be helping you. And I really have come into a kind of maybe mature relationship with people where I'm like, I'll help you and you help me. And that is love, and that is intimacy, and that is, I love my family of origin. I was very close with my mom, who I lost, and our family, at least my interpretation was, we are here for each other, but we don't ask anything from out there. And I don't even know if that was the intended message, but that was the message that I got. So needing help is not something I'm very comfortable with, but I have definitely needed help. And I have to be careful not to go, okay, well, you wore out your welcome, you wore out your help
Right.
fund there. So I'm trying.
And I think our audience will appreciate that, and many others, right? That, like, and I think you even say in the film that, like, I'm not okay.
Right.
Right. And I think it's important to share that it's this ongoing recovery, is this ongoing experience.
Yeah.
And I know not to say journey, because I know
It's not my favorite.
that's not your favorite word, but to go through this process,
Yeah.
if you will. Which brings us to the film, Accidentally Brave, and the crux of what happened 9 years ago. Just kind of share what happened 9 years ago, Matt, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Just for those of you that don't know my story, I was living a very nice suburban life outside of New York City. I was married for, I think I'd been together with my husband 20 years, married about 17. We had 3 kids. My daughter was 16. I have twin boys who were 11. I'm an actress, and I had a nice-ish career, but really my husband was the main breadwinner, and also that allowed me to be with the kids most of the time. He was directing and producing television shows, and things were pretty nice. I had the dog, the cat, the house, a nice backyard, lived near my family, very close with my younger brother. And about 5 a.m., a summer morning, my boys had just gotten back from sleep. They went to sleepaway camp, and they got back, and I had a job. I was doing a guest spot on a TV show, and my husband had a later start that day for his work, and my daughter was 16, so she was going to stay with the boys, and I left the house, which was very rare for me to be the first to leave. It was actually delicious for me because I was quiet. I didn't have to get anybody breakfast or worry about anything. Even the animals were asleep because I had a very early call. So I think I left the house around 4 or something in the morning. And I got my coffee and I'm driving to work and my phone rang and it was my daughter. And it was, 5 a.m., which was surprising. But I have a teenage daughter. She calls sometimes with dramatic things. And the scream that I heard when I picked up the phone still haunts me. And I couldn't understand her. But I knew, just the way a mom knows, that this was not, that something, I had never heard her sound like this. And I couldn't understand her. So I was still driving to work. And I was like, sweetheart, you gotta, I can't hear you. What's going on? And then I heard my boys, she must have gone into their room and I heard them and they were crying and there was screaming. And I was like, put your dad on the phone. What's going on? And she said something about the police being there. And I still didn't understand. And I said, I love you. I'm going to hang up and I'm going to call your dad and I'll call you right back. And I'm not sure what's going on. And then I called my husband and he sounded like a stranger. He was so weirdly, he sounded so weird. And I was like, what's going on? I was screaming at this point, what's going on? He was like, I can't really talk right now. And the police were there to arrest him. And for illegal images, illegal pornography. But I didn't know that still. I called my daughter back and I was like, something's happening with Dad. When I tell you that if you had told me 3 days before that my husband was going to be arrested, I would have said, really? Right. But then I also wouldn't have guessed in the first 30 things of what he would be arrested for, that it would be that. I was so shocked. So that was the beginning. I didn't really even know. I went to work. I kept driving to work. I look back at this now and some people go, you did what? I just kind of, even telling the story now, I can feel it. I just went into some sort of I had my brother come over to my house. He took my kids. My dad went over and took my husband to a lawyer, but I still didn't quite understand. I went to work. I said to the assistant director, could I be done by lunch? Which is not something you do on a television show, especially if you're not a regular. And this is a part of the story that I didn't know until I did the play. And that assistant director came to the play and he spoke to me after and he said, I've known you because I've been a working actress since I was 14. And he said, I've just known you through the years, between just being on sets with my husband or him working with me. And he said, I knew you said a family emergency, but he said, I just knew something was really, I didn't know what it was.
Right.
So I finished my lunch. And I had my father, I don't know if these are details, but they're details that mattered to me. My husband was dropped off to meet me near the set. He didn't want to come on the set because he knew everybody there and we didn't know, I still didn't understand. So I actually met him kind of in an alleyway and I just looked at him and I so was hoping that he'd go, okay, crazy story. Doing research for
misidentity or something.
Yeah,
or
like
something,
the boys
right?
hit some tab on, but he just looked at me and he just looked ashen and small and old and young. And I was like, who is this person? What is going on? And that was the beginning. That was the beginning. And we drove home, we got the kids, and we were like, okay, I'm not sure I understand what is happening, but let's just hold on. Let's just hold on. And then the next day, as I was still kind of processing, what? You've done what? You have an addiction to what? I don't even know if I heard that word yet. It was in the paper. It was everywhere. It was from the New York Post to USA Today to everyone on Facebook, and like pictures from my Instagram and Facebook were being used to talk about the story. And even while I'm telling it now, I don't feel the shame. I feel out of my body. This was not my life. This was not supposed to happen. This was not, I am not a new worrier. When I said earlier that I worry about things,
Right.
That wasn't new from this.
But this is also very jarring. It's like out of the blue.
I was a person who was like, I will worry about my kid. Like, if my kid's going to camp, I'm going to worry that people will be mean or that he'll be mean to them. Or this was not on my bingo card of things to worry about. And I am around addiction. I'm aware of addiction, but not this. And I don't even know how, I don't really have words to describe how I was and how my family was and how my kids were. I think one of the reasons I wanted to write about this part was because I don't, and do it as a play, because people are like, when did that happen? It didn't happen around this time. I wasn't like, But I think once I got slightly into some kind of recovery, I was like, I don't know how to put words to this part, but I can show you. Like, I couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't, the person who was my rock, I married my best friend, and that sounds like a Hallmark card, but I really, really felt safe with my husband. And suddenly I didn't feel safe anywhere. That being said, that word is a tricky word, especially with the charges. I knew pretty early, and I believed that he was not hurting my kids, or really anybody in real life, that this was an online acting out situation. But even that word, I didn't know about the word acting out. I didn't know about sex addiction, let alone porn addiction. I thought that was just like something used as a punchline on a sitcom, and certainly not for me or my life or our life. So I was really shattered. But also life continues. I mean, his life kind of came to a screeching halt. Like, he got fired from every job. He was so suddenly not working. And he pretty quickly recognized that this was a real problem, not just because he was arrested, but because he had had this secret for so long. And I don't mean the secret about the illegal acting out, but just the porn.
Right.
I think the illegal was like the last little part of that addiction. So he went pretty quickly to Gentle Path at the Meadows, which was life-saving for him. But I was also like, okay, so the dog has to get to the vet, and the kids need to get to the dentist, and the whole suburban town is looking at me, or at least I felt like that. Everybody probably had their own stuff going on. But to me, it was like, I've got to go to the grocery store, and that felt like, it felt impossible. I felt like that was an impossible task, to have to see people. So that's what happened.
Yeah.
That's the beginning of what happened.
Right.
And then life had to keep going. And there was, in my situation, there was a combination of the legal fallout, the emotional fallout and consequences, the actual financial consequences, including we had to sell our house. I was trying to go back to work, but I felt like, who's with the kids? But could my husband be with the kids? And something in that time, there was also a lot of, it was a really hard time. And there was also something really beautiful. I was speaking to a woman just the other day, maybe just yesterday, and her husband's in some trouble, and their world is very small right now. And our world got really small. And this was before COVID, when there were no pods. We became this kind of pod where we do things together. And when my husband got back from rehab, he was different. And there was a really beautiful part of him that I actually hadn't seen in a really long time. Because I say I married my best friend. I had no idea this was going on. But looking back, I didn't know that there was anything going on in any kind of sexual dysfunction way. But looking back, he was getting more and more irritable. He was getting depressed. He was short-tempered with me and the kids. And that was slow. So I didn't really see it. But that was gone. So it was this weird combination of everything is terrible, but here's my person back. Here's my person looking at me with those eyes that I saw all those years ago. And something was off these last couple years. I just didn't know what it was. So it was this terrible, wonderful time, that early recovery, where things were so scary and I didn't know what was going to happen. But I also had this new, like I had my partner back in a way that I hadn't.
Right. I want to go back to something you said,
Okay.
you know, because it seems like once everything kind of happened and it was out there, there was a shift, right?
Yeah.
He's the breadwinner, this and the other, and then all that shifted on you, not just being the breadwinner, but also, you know, the have to like walk the dog and do logistical stuff and or whatever. Talk about that process of the dynamic, if you will, like that shifting of those roles. Because that's jarring in itself, outside of everything else going on.
It was jarring. It is jarring. And I think that one of the most jarring parts of having your story public, but I would guess that even other partners whose stories aren't as public, but whose families maybe know, there was a lot of pressure, I felt like, during that time for people wanting to know whether I was staying or going. And when I found my way into recovery rooms, either a great therapist or a group of other partners of sex addicts, or a 12-step program, or even Family Week, I felt like in some ways those were the only spaces I could breathe in. Even right now, just because there was some understanding and there was less pressure to know what my next move was. I don't even know if that was really your question, but that was something that I needed. As we spoke earlier, not only am I aware of other people's energies, I really want approval and from other people, and I had to let go of that. I wish I had come to that in some wonderful spiritual way,
Right.
but this created a situation where I had to just go, I cannot listen to all the voices. I have to get quiet and listen to myself. And I have to really just focus on what is best for this family, for my kids and for myself. And I felt like I had to surround myself with people, and I have a lot of great people in my life, but I had to get even smaller, to people who were, a lot of addicts in recovery reached out, and I found a lot of grace and comfort around people sharing with me I'm not the worst thing I ever did. I believe that your husband is not the worst thing he ever looked at. And I just needed a minute to catch my breath while I was doing all these other things, like you said, and get into my own recovery and get into my own, I found some power during that time because I had to do things by myself that I had gotten used to somebody else doing, quite honestly.
Right.
And there's a weird, I keep using the word weird, but I think that in my case, there was this feeling of you broke it, you fix it, for me towards my husband, but he actually couldn't fix me. He did break me in some ways, and I was certainly broken in many ways coming into the relationship, but he could not fix me. We both wanted him to fix me. Trust me. He was like, what can I do? But I had to do this work because of this trauma and this impossible situation. It forced me to do some work on myself that was actually really good for me to do.
Right.
And yes, the dynamic changed, but I think in some ways, here we are all these years later, married, and the dynamic is different again because he's on his feet a little more. And I feel like in some ways I've exhaled, and I'm having some feelings come back up that maybe I didn't fully process back then. But I will never make, or at least I should never say never, but I hope to never make a person my higher power again. And I think I had done that in my marriage. And it was extra hard to function.
For sure.
So yeah, that was challenging, and I think it was challenging for the world to be in acceptance of that, and so I had to stop looking at what the world was thinking and just sometimes it was like 10 minutes at a time, not even one day at a time. It was like I got to do this task. It was challenging to have my kids, but it was also everything because I was like, okay, well, they need this today. And so that was what I did. And I think it also allowed me to give my partner a chance, and also maybe having lost a parent. I mean, really lost, like death is pretty final.
Of course.
So I didn't want that for my kids. So I wanted him to not die or kill himself, which I thought was a possibility,
right?
A real possibility. And I wanted to give him, this person that I loved so much, a chance, which I did, and gave the kids an opportunity to have a dad.
Of course.
I mean, I knew he was going to be their dad regardless.
Right. You know, I in my prep for our conversation, I found myself having more and more empathy for your situation because, you know, it's one thing for couples to go through this, you know, and there's no limelight.
Yeah.
Right. But we're talking about media capital of the world, is any other, and then we're in an era of social media, so the comments. Right.
Yeah, the comments
were
rough.
They were rough, right?
Yeah,
so I
they probably still are. I've gotten a little better about not looking, but sometimes really sometimes really well-meaning people even say things that are not. I mean, believe me, I know they're really mean comments.
Right.
But sometimes people say things. Someone said to me day before yesterday, "You're so brave to." Open your family up to loathing. And I was like, oh, is that what I'm doing? I thought I was helping. I thought, and this was a person who truly was trying to be kind. It was hard to have. Now I talk about in the play and the film, my angel, this person who just, because It was in the terrible New York Post. Sorry, New York Post. But, the story with like details that were, believe me, the story was bad, but this even had details that weren't true.
Right.
And it was just like the worst.
I saw it.
But she saw it, and she was working with someone who I know and said, you know that wife, right? And she found me. And so am I grateful that my story was public? Would I have loved to keep it a secret? Yes, and. Yes, and. And this angel said to me at the time, this isn't in the play, oh, Maddie, you're so lucky that your story is so public. And I said, excuse me, come again? She goes, well, it's not your job to keep the secret now. And it's not your kid's job to do the dance and keep the secret. And so many families with secrets that come out, but just enough for the family to know, or just enough for the wife to know. And then the wife becomes the crazy, angry one, and the kids are like, what's up with mom? Or the kids are asked to hold on to, and I did it for 24 hours, like, let's not tell anyone. And that's just a lot for kids to manage. Now, I'm not saying my kids are not traumatized, and I'm not saying my kids are not always thrilled that their mom is going on podcasts and making movies about this, and they'd like to maybe just put it back under the rug. But at least we're talking about the whole story, and that this is a family. It's not just my story. I wish it were just my story to tell, but I don't know how to tell it without mentioning my kids and my husband.
Right.
That's part of the story. And our story is that we got back up off the floor. That's our story. It's not everybody's story, but we did it together. I am not, believe me, I was not holding, I like that image. And there were probably days where I was holding the car up off the kids, but there were also days that those kids were holding the car up. And there were days that my husband was holding a car up. I mean, I do think about his story now more as I have caught my breath. And, his whole world went upside down, and he has had to walk through the world with everyone knowing the worst thing he ever did.
Right.
Everyone. And the public part of it is the people who show up for you still, including, dare I say, me, what a thing to have the world know the worst thing about you and you still receive love, and your kids still love you, and your wife still loves you. So there is something powerful about being a part of our little family, and that doesn't mean we don't annoy each other and fight. And,
right.
But the public element is tricky, and my nerves about who's sitting where is really not what it is. It's, am I going to upset my kids again? I don't want them to have any more pain or trauma. And I believe talking about this stuff is important. No, I didn't know anyone, and I know a lot of people. I have lived different places. I'm a very friendly person. I don't let people go when I love people. I really hold on. And I didn't know anyone who went through this, and I didn't know anyone who knew anyone who did. And it was the loneliest time.
I bet.
Now, P.S., once I started telling more of the story in public, I have found out that I did know people. It's just that it's so shameful and it's so scary to talk about. And not just, my story is really extreme. I get that. But sex addiction, even at its most PG level, is still so shameful and so not talked about. And it brings shame to both the addict and the partner and the kids and the family. And I just feel like because my story was already public, it gave me permission to tell the really bad parts, but also there's some beautiful parts. And let me just say, because sometimes I forget to say this, my family, especially the kids and me, suffered because of my husband's addiction. Also, child pornography is a terrible, terrible thing. And there are victims that are not me.
100%.
And I just want to be clear that no one in my family thinks it's a small thing, that it is a huge thing. And I know not everybody agrees with me, but I think talking about this and getting people help, I think if my husband had gotten help for his porn addiction, he wouldn't have continued to go deeper and darker until that was part of what was going on. So
Right.
I just think people need to know where they can get help. And people
Absolutely.
need to know that if they do ask for help, that they won't be thrown out of their family necessarily. And some people will be, but at least I can say that my family's here. We're good. My husband just graduated from Hunter Graduate Program for Social Work and is working with addicts. That's his life now. So it's different.
And speaking of Jace, I want to ask you this because
Yeah.
I know the low-hanging fruit of question that people often ask,
Yeah.
how could you stay with them?
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to go there.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about is, because you mentioned Family Week multiple times, and I know that's a pivotal piece in this story.
It saved my family.
That's kind of where I'm going with this. How pivotal was Family Week in making that decision to, you know what, we're going to keep this family together?
It was beyond pivotal. I think it changed the story in a lot of ways for me. I didn't want to go to Family Week. I didn't want to be around my husband, let alone, for me, it was a very big deal to think about having to leave the kids who had just been traumatized and go travel to go see the person that traumatized them. But I had first of all, I got really lucky in this part of my life because my angel referred me to a CSAT, which is a therapist who works specifically with sex addiction and partners and addicts, and she just knew. And I see a lot of people in my position where the therapists are freaked out. Like my therapist was so calm and I really, really trusted her. She also told me that most partners stay, actually, and she also told me I didn't have to decide right away, that I was in shock and that let's just put a pin in that and in 6 months we can circle back. But right now, the last thing you or your kids need is to be dealing with a divorce of any kind. So let's just get you stable. And that was such a relief. But she told me to go to Family Week, and my angel had been to Family Week, and they both said, this isn't for him, because at that point I didn't really care about what was good for him. This is for you. This is for the kids, and this is for you. And when I landed cursing and, complaining about having to go to this godforsaken place in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, and, driving around, why do I have to drive a car when the addicts got picked up in a van, and just, blah, 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 blah. First of all, I think I took a breath for the first time, because even though I had been going to some support group meetings, not a lot, to be honest, before this, but I had been going to therapy. But really, it was just in the middle of the day of everything else. This was the first time I had a couple of days to just feel however I was feeling. So that alone was the beginning of, I think, my own recovery, of going, I'm so sad. I'm so mad. I'm so scared. Because I couldn't feel those things around, or I felt like I couldn't really feel them around my kids or my family. My family, who I was like, no, don't hate my husband. No, don't send me to the loony bin. Like, I can't explain it. I don't understand it yet. And here I was for a few days just by myself with other women whose husbands had done terrible things. And I wasn't responsible for anything or anyone except just whatever this weird program was going to be. And I was open enough to learning about addiction, not from my husband writing me these letters telling me, here's the way my frontal lobe cortex works. I'm like, no, sir. No, thank you.
Right.
But here were these good, very wise doctors teaching me that good people do some terrible things in the throes of this horrible, horrible disease. And I couldn't see it with my person yet. But I met these other men there, and I met their wives, and their wives were awesome. They were really cool and beautiful and funny and smart and not lame martyrs and doormats. They were these great women that had had this happen, and their husbands seemed broken but good, and they seemed like they were so sad that they had hurt their families, and I couldn't really take in my own partner. But seeing these guys, and the stories were different, all the acting out was different, but there was something that shifted in me there. And I also got some sisters. Like, who else could I talk to about this stuff? And we were and are very different human beings from very different backgrounds, and we were sisters immediately and still to this day. So that time was incredibly important. It was the beginning of hearing my husband say he was sorry in what didn't feel like. Sorry felt so
hollow.
Nothing. Yeah, that doesn't even begin to cover it. Like, sorry is when you step on my foot. Like, what? But I was able to hear, because he also got help in explaining how truly devastated he was, and that allowed me, I don't know, it was just, there was so much hope that week, and there was so much help for me to just, I wept. I sat down and cried, and I don't think I stopped. And other people had different reactions, but I just was, and it resonated. There was some part of me that was like, I believe this, because nothing made sense before then. This wasn't my husband. So I was like, I guess I'm just crazy, that it is my husband and I was just crazy. And it was like, oh no, addiction really is a thief, and it stole this good person's brain. And then I was like, wait, am I in a cult? Is this crazy? What? I don't know. But I had homework every night, and I did it. And I felt, instead of feeling, what are the kids feeling? What is the world feeling? How are we going to get through this? It was just like, I just saw this person who was my person. And I believed, I had hope. It went away. It went away, but I felt hope for the first time. And I felt deep sadness, but I also had some fun. And I just went, all right, this is not what it was supposed to look like, but here we are. And it felt spiritual, and it felt important, and it felt like, okay, maybe we're going to be okay. And there were other people around who weren't telling me this is a disaster, like emergency. The pace was slow. I mean, my husband looked amazing, which was annoying. Like, he was suntanned. He hadn't had coffee or alcohol or pornography or a phone, and he was detoxing, and past detoxing. He was in this beautiful space, which, like I said, was annoying, but it was also kind of like, oh, there you are. I was not so okay. I mean, I was really shaky. But leaving Family Week, I didn't even know how to make any I had no boundaries in my marriage. I didn't know that I had to have boundaries. Like, what do you mean? Like, there's software where I can have it on my phone. Like, I didn't know how to do the next step. And I had people there, again, deep privilege, that we could afford this at the time. We couldn't, but we threw money at it because someone told us. And thank God I didn't think about the money, because we had people there going, okay, here's how you do the next part. Here's how you do the next thing. Look, here's his meeting list for when he gets home. Here's where he's going to go to therapy. You don't have to do it all. Here's a peer group that he got. And I know that sounds like all he, but that helped me because I could not be his savior any longer either. Like, that wasn't going to happen. Including things, maybe only this audience will laugh, but like, I got my 3-month chip and I'm like, I'm not the audience for that. Like, 3 months ago was the worst day of my life, other than the day my mom died. So, and it's a close tie. So like, don't come celebrate with me, mister. But he had other people that he could go, okay, hear you. You're right. Let me go call my sponsor. Let me go call my boys, men. We didn't call each other. We weren't allowed to say boys and girls. Let me call my men peers, my fellows that I met at the Meadows at Gentle Path, or that I met at this meeting. And again, our consequences were so huge. And I say our because they were my consequences too. Mm-hmm. But when you lose your job and you've got nothing else to do, you can go to a lot of meetings and you can go to couples meetings and you can get a really solid recovery that I was able to witness, which as a partner, I think when it's secret and you can kind of go, let's just keep everything the same, and I'll just like duck into an SRA meeting like once a week, but no one will know. God bless the people that do that. And that is, I'm sure, what I would have done if I had the option. But this was like, we were all in. Like, no one expected us to go to the Christmas party. So we were all recovery all the time.
Got it.
And I think that was a blessing. And I think that allowed us, and it wasn't secret from our kids. You know, my book on like mending a shattered heart, you know, was right there on the table. And there's my, you know, daily reader for partners of sex addicts. It was not like, oh, let's be quiet about this, because, and the model of addiction, which I learned to accept most days. There were days I woke up in the middle of the night and went, I don't explain it to me again.
Right.
Explain it to me again. I don't understand. I don't understand. Explain it to me again. But at least I had some beginning of understanding, and there were books and there was science, and I could go, okay, this is what we're calling this.
Correct. So, Accidentally Brave. We're here, like you said, in New York for the second screening of 4 that we're doing around the country, right? You talk at the end of the film about being of service.
Yeah.
Is Accidentally Brave, is that what this is? An act of service?
I hope so.
Okay.
I really hope so. I think that it can also be a piece of art. I think art can be service. Service can be art. I took what I know how to do, which is tell stories, and I took my experience, and there was something divine in there too, because I hadn't written like this before, but something just told me that if I wasn't going to tell the story, I was waiting for somebody else to, and I really, it was important to me. It was important to me to get this story told from the partner's point of view. I hope it's an act of service. I didn't have the courage to tell my story until I told it privately in recovery rooms, in Family Week, in therapy groups. And I was so helped by hearing other people's stories. So, I mean, it was everything to me. I was really helped by therapists, but my fellows, not just the addicts, but the partners of addicts who were sharing their struggles, felt just like it gave me oxygen. So I did want to present this work as an act of service. And I think that the Meadows, the marriage that we have of the Meadows and Accidentally Brave has become this stamp of service, because that's what the Meadows does as well. And to say, oh, this is not just a movie you can go see why that crazy lady stayed with the guy that did the thing. It's like, no, this telling the truth, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. I'm just as ashamed to tell you how much I love my husband today as I am to tell you how angry I am. Like maybe even more so. And the film is about a specific time, the loneliest time, the beginning time. But I'm really happy to be talking to you today and to be presenting the film with the people from the Meadows where there can be some joy. I feel shame about that I feel joy, but I do. And I think that is service too, to people, especially in early recovery. I wasn't hoping for joy. I was hoping for survival. I was hoping for like, will my kids be not hospitalized for full, like really, that was what I was going for. Or will they be maybe okay and then like possibly. And so for me to share not just Accidentally Brave, but the update of here I am, my kids are awesome. They're not just like, in spite of everything, like, no, they're just great. And maybe they're partly great because of everything. Again, wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. I don't really have a lot of enemies, but I wouldn't wish it on
I can't
anybody.
see that really.
I have a couple enemies.
Okay.
I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
Fair enough.
I wouldn't. And my children are young adults now, and they will have to deal with the trauma of the police coming into their home, of their dad having this charge, of their mom really falling apart and getting back up and falling down. That's their story, unfortunately. And they're super compassionate. They're super aware. They're funny as all get out. They're kind. They're not judgmental, I think. I'm sure they have some judgment. And they certainly have judgment of me. But they're thriving in their lives with an occasional thing that all kids, I think, and people have. But I think it's really important for me to say that because I didn't have any... not that I consider myself a role model, but I didn't know anybody who had a husband in recovery from sex addiction or porn addiction. I didn't know anybody who dealt with legal things or public shame and came and is still walking and talking. I don't want to say I've come through it because there are still times and we still deal. I mean, listen, there are still issues. My husband is a felon. He's a convicted felon. My husband's on the sex offender list. Like even saying that right now, I want to projectile vomit. I won't, but I want to. It is still, there are still days where we walk down the street and I see a family, a young family, and I go, oh, wait, how did this happen? So I'm not saying that it's all unicorns and lollipops, and we have been through and will certainly still go through things. But we also have had some real great times. And I believe in recovery. I believe in giving people chances. I believe that I married a really great person who got really sick. And I'm glad that I wrote about it and presented this piece. It's still hard. It's still hard. And I'm worried, honestly, that it's going to hurt him. I'm worried that it's going to hurt my kids. It's like it's public, then it gets quiet, then it gets public. But my children are young adults now, and I think that I hope that they respect that this is something, their dad is helping addicts, and this was important to me. I feel like we're kind of a silent group. And actually, way back when my husband was talking about this pretty soon after the arrest and once he got into recovery, and he really recognized how prevalent porn addiction was, and it wasn't just him and his deep secret, and he wanted, because he's a filmmaker, he thought he would do a documentary about the dangers. I think it is the dangers of pornography and how easily available, because we became experts in this. We studied it, and it was like, oh my God. And look, and we had 11-year-old boys, and it was like, you give them a phone, you give them access to hardcore pornography like that for free, anonymously. And so it was important, and he was starting to do work on this project, which ended up not happening. But at the time, I was like, "Don't forget the partners. Don't forget the partners. You have to interview partners, and we don't get our stories told." There's one S-Anon meeting in all of New York City. There's 100 S meetings. We have a voice, And he was like, "I hear you. I hear you." And I was like, "And I want to be a consultant on the." And and it just made me feel really agitated. And then I just went, what if I just tell my story the way I know how to tell it? And I hope that I did that with integrity of, again, saying, like, I can't tell you my kid's story. They might sit here and go, "We're not okay," but I think they're okay. So it's my vision, but I can share my experience. And I think that partners of addicts of any kind are like, well, I'm having my own experience, but I can't talk about it without talking about the person.
Right.
And then am I screwing up their anonymity? So it's a complicated situation, but something in me told me that I should do it. And I feel most days like I'm glad that I did. And yes, I really hope that I think it has. I mean, I've been on the receiving end of people saying that, thank you. Partners, couples, men have reached out and said, I didn't know, I couldn't really understand how my wife was feeling, and watching this helped me have compassion. I think addicts in early recovery, dare I say, have to be a little bit self-involved. And I have my own recovery that's selfish, and selfish is not a bad thing. But I think betrayal trauma is such a specific thing. And when you are the person in recovery, but also the person who caused the betrayal trauma, it's really hard. And I hope that my story is gentle and realistic to the addicts as well.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that and champion that cause of service, especially for the partner's point of view, because Aaliyah, who we're here at the Meadows,
Yes.
VP of Alumni Services, we worked together on a show called Recovery Replay. And so on that show, we tell the story of a person in recovery, the loved one, the partner,
Great.
and the clinician. And every time we have a new episode, everybody's always loved the partner's part, because that's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. So I am in service with you.
I feel like
that
that,
regard,
Dominic.
yeah.
I even was looking at like movies, and there's great, and listen, nobody loves addicts more than me. I am a lover of addicts. I think they are some of the most incredible, sensitive, amazing humans.
Mm-hmm.
And great at telling, a lot of people in recovery tell their stories beautifully. There's great films, and they're not and unabashedly like,
Mm-hmm.
here's the ugly part of it, and
Right.
here's the beautiful part of it. And I just think we partners and by the way, there's a lot of crossover too, but like codependent people, like it's like, oh, I don't want to. It's harder in some ways to tell this story. I think. So I'm going to listen to that podcast now, because I love hearing how people are managing it, and also being honest about like the anger that comes up. I mean, I'm sitting here in a pretty nice jumpsuit and like did my hair, but what I feel like the service of the play and now the film is I'm trying to show you I was on that floor. And I've never hit a person in my life, and I hit my husband during this time. Like I had a homicidal rage in me that was a real thing. And I can sit here and talk about it and look kind of nice, but I wanted to show it. I wanted to be like, here's the animal sounds I made when my soul was crushed by this disease, because my soul was crushed. And so, yeah, if today I'm a little anxious, but we still get to go out to a nice dinner tonight, like that is a miracle.
Absolutely.
And I forget sometimes. So I really, I actually really appreciate being asked about the hard part, because it's not my everyday. And there's an expression, look back, but don't stare. And I can stare sometimes, but looking back is important. And I don't love thinking about it, but it's important because then I remember that last night when we just ordered in some food and had a FaceTime with my son and, watched a dumb show. Like, I couldn't even watch TV. Everything was so triggering. Everything was like, well, I'll never have that. Like, just to end with, like, women say to me sometimes, like, well, how do you avoid triggers? And I was like, oh, sweet, sweet sister.
Right.
It's not even the things that I thought it was going to be. It's not like, well, I mean, of course, don't watch that movie. Which,
right.
Of course, then I go and watch.
Right.
There's something wrong with me. But, like, it's like the Lifetime movie that's just sweet, the Christmas movie, the Hanukkah movie, the whatever, where you're like, oh, our holidays will never be the same. Like, there is nothing that didn't trigger me that first year or two. And that's the other thing, if I can just say again and again, it wasn't like, and then I was fine. Like,
right.
It's a bit of a ride.
Ebbs and flows. Yeah.
I think in some ways when my babies went off to college, it was like a new level of grief, of like, oh, okay. But now, where are the things that I thought I grieved but are coming back up because I have a little more space? So, work in progress.
Yeah, no, definitely understand that. And last question, Maddie.
Okay.
And you kind of talked about this a little bit, but again, Accidentally Brave is, it's you of service. And I'm curious to know when people, let's say somebody goes and watches the film.
Yeah.
And maybe you get a phone call, text message, email, social media message. Like, you know what? I didn't really think this sex addiction thing was a thing.
Yeah.
But I went and saw Accidentally Brave, and I went and talked to somebody. I checked into treatment. What would that mean for you?
It would mean everything. It would make it worth the other comments that I get, which are hard to hear.
Yeah.
Hard to hear.
Yeah.
But that's why I don't want anybody else to go through this part of it, to get all the gifts that I've also gotten. And if there are very few sex addicts that I have met who have checked themselves in or told their partner what was going on. It's usually, there's a term for it. It's D-Day. It's Discovery Day. It's not usually, hey, there's something I have to tell you. And if somebody can see this and go, hey, there's something I have to tell you, and it's scary, and I don't want to break your heart, but I need help, and I'm sick, and I need help, and that would be awesome. That would be one of the main reasons I wanted to do this.
Beyond Theory, powered by Meadows Behavioral Healthcare, is produced and hosted by me, Dominic Lawson. The film recording of this episode was created by our videographers, Haley Storer and Jesse Adelman. You can watch it at beyondtheorypodcast.com. Special thanks to Maddie Corman, creator of the film Accidentally Brave. To learn more about Maddie's work, go to www.gentlepathmeadows.com/accidentally brave. Be sure to review and subscribe to the Beyond Theory podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you think someone could benefit from these stories, please share them with a friend, neighbor, or loved one. Finally, thank you for watching, and I hope you join us next time for another episode of Beyond Theory.